Good evening all, and welcome. Tonight we're going to be heading into ghost towns. Those creepy, abandoned places long forgotten to history. Who knows what's happened within them, or why they've been abandoned. Find out now, so get comfortable, and let the darkness take control. This happened back in 2007. We were both women in our early 20s and sharing an apartment in a major metro area, not a small town but not a big city either. Through the short stretch of wood behind our apartment complex, there was a neighborhood of single-family homes. Typical suburban cul-de-sac American middle-class neighborhood. Except that this neighborhood was completely unoccupied. Like I said, it was around 2007, so the effects of the American recession were still in full swing. A developer had brought the neighborhood and all the houses to tear down. They had built a nice shiny new street from the main road to the neighborhood, but money probably ran out before the homes could be bulldozed. At least that's my best guess, as there were several stalled construction projects in the area that had met the same fate. There was nothing in the immediate area in the way of shops, stores, or gas stations, just empty, residential homes. A bit eerie, but nothing overtly creepy. Being young, adventurous, and having some daytime hours free due to our retail jobs, my bestie and I liked to go on walks in this abandoned neighborhood. There was a short path through some woods, and then you came out into the main neighborhood street, which started out gravel and turned into asphalt towards the nicer end of the neighborhood with the bigger, newer houses. We'd walk up and down, chatting and maybe surreptitiously hitting a joint, just being young and carefree. One of the homes looked to have a few acres of land, and there was a big field where we'd take blankets and go lay in sometimes. So, on the day that this encounter took place, the sun was shining, and there was a brilliant blue sky. It was probably late summer or early fall. I can't remember which exactly, aka broad daylight. Like I said earlier, the neighborhood was a bit eerie, but on that day we felt pretty safe. We were on one of our midday abandoned neighborhood strolls when we see a car on the street heading in our direction. This wasn't the first time we'd seen a vehicle there. It was a small blue hatchback. I don't know cars very well, so that was the most specific description I could come up with. Neither of us got a good look at the driver's face, but we see that there are two people in the car. All I can make out is that the driver is male, white, and has brown hair, wearing a blue and white raglan t-shirt. The car rumbles past us on the gravel road and out of sight, and we continue on, thinking it was odd, but not that odd. A few minutes later, the car comes back from the direction it came, passing us from behind. It drives out of sight over this little hill, and we figure maybe they got turned around since there's obviously nothing of interest on this road except this abandoned subdivision. We continue walking for a few minutes until we reach a little hill, and as we get to the top we see the car that just drove past us. The car was stopped on the road a little way ahead of us, just sitting there with its brake lights on. That's when I notice the person in the passenger seat has gone, and I find this odd and start internally questioning whether I even saw the passenger at all, until my friend says, "Wasn't there another person?" My hackles start to go up, and I'm creeped out at this point. Something about the way that car was just sitting there idling, like they were waiting for us. There's nothing of interest behind us where they could have dropped the passenger off, which makes their absence very unsettling. I don't know how long we were standing there staring at this car, possibly with the driver's accomplice having been dropped off behind us and the car in front of us lying in wait, but it felt like forever. I had a cold, heavy feeling in my stomach. My friend and I are both frozen to the spot, hair on the back of our necks standing up, mental alarm bells ringing. It's dawning on me that no one knows where I am. While I'm standing there, frozen in fear, brain frantically trying to figure out how long it will be until my boyfriend would get off work and discover us missing. The car started backing up towards us fast. As it accelerates backwards towards us, my friend and I come to our senses and tear off towards the woods, cutting through the backyard of one of the abandoned houses. We frantically bushwhack our way through the short stretch of wood and come out on the opposite side of our apartment complex and run like hell until we reach our building. I have no idea what that driver was doing, what their intentions were, or where his passenger disappeared to. But either way, creepy driver, let's not meet. My cousin and I thought it would be a good idea to visit a ghost town that was located nearby. We had heard stories from other relatives saying that they saw a woman and a daughter in a dress standing or walking by the side of a road. Whenever they passed her, their cell phones would either die or completely lose signal, and one of my cousins said his car stopped working as soon as he passed the woman. 7 of us got into a big van and went to the ghost town to see if the paranormal activity was true. We were talking and laughing in the van, making fun of people who get scared of the town that they were probably just imagining things. None of us had been to a ghost town before, and we didn't know when we would reach it. As we crossed a bridge that led to the ghost town, the scenery completely changed. A huge fog appeared out of nowhere and covered the whole town and the bridge. The laughter in the van died out, and we were all dead quiet because we knew we had entered the ghost town area. We parked the van on a dirt road that was a little further than the entrance to the ghost town, and we turned off the car and closed all the windows and just sat there looking into the dark, empty houses. I felt as if the houses were full of ghosts, just staring at the van, as if we had invaded their space. The atmosphere was so tense, and after 5 minutes of just sitting there in the dark, the driver of the van suddenly turned the car on and drove out of the town. We all wondered why he left so suddenly, and asked him, but he wouldn't answer. He parked at a nearby gas station and his face was extremely pale. He finally started talking and said he saw a little girl walking behind one of the houses coming towards the van. He was so scared. You could see him trembling. He ran inside the gas station and the cashier saw his pale face, and surprisingly he asked the driver if we had just returned from the ghost town. We told the cashier that we did, and that our driver supposedly saw a little girl. The cashier told us that he had passed by the town a few times and saw the same thing. He advised us that if we wanted to experience something paranormal, we should wash the car down with those little window washing things they have at the gas station. We thought this was a good idea, and so we all went outside and washed the car all around. We washed the top of the car, the sides, the doors, all the windows and the mirrors washed. Then we took paper towels and dried it completely. We sat at the parking station for a good 10 minutes to see if we were going to go back to the ghost town or just go home. We agreed to switch drivers and return. We went back on the dirt road and traveled into the center of the town. We sat in the van for 15 minutes, just looking out for signs of a girl or signs of activity in the houses. I can't explain how tense the atmosphere was. There were 7 of us, all aged 17 plus, in a van, and we had to hold hands. It was weird, but everyone was so scared we couldn't help it, and after 20 minutes in the center of the town I had begun to see a figure in the distance. It seemed like the girl everyone was talking about, but something was odd. It didn't look like the girl was walking. She was making these odd movements as if she was limping or something. I told everyone to look into the distance and everyone said they saw her also. We watched her and after 3 to 5 seconds the figure looked as if it were getting up. We realized she was crawling and had began to stand up. Right when she stood up, it vanished into the blackness, and a loud bang hit the driver's side. The gravel beneath the van sounded as if someone was crawling under the car, and 3 very distinct thumping noises came from underneath. The thumping was directly below my feet, and I could feel something hitting the car. Something also stepped onto the back bumper of the car, and a small thump could be heard hitting the back window. I made the decision that we should leave immediately, and so we did. We got to the gas station, everyone got out the car and we all saw it. On the driver's side mirror there was a large, fresh handprint, and we were all freaked out. On my way out to the back of the car, there was a little footprint on the back bumper, along with a set of hand and footprints on the back window of the van. We took the paper towel and tried to smear or dry up the handprint, but they wouldn't come off the car, and we sat at the gas station for a good 30 minutes freaking out, and still the prints wouldn't dry. When you touched them, they didn't feel wet or anything, but they looked as if they were. Everyone was scared to get back in the van, but we eventually did, and made sure not to drive the van directly to someone's house, because in our culture, something could have clung onto the van and tried to follow us home, so we went to a nearby Walmart instead. We stayed in this store for 3/4 of an hour, and came out and the prints were still there. We had to call someone to get us and left the van in the parking lot until the next day. The prints eventually vanished, and we took the van back to my cousin's house. Never going back to that ghost town again. Over 10 years ago, my boyfriend and I were driving around in the country, over an hour from our house. We were just driving for the hell of it, but we were also half-heartedly looking for this little waterfall we'd heard about in the area. So we left the main highway and took this side road which wound up and down a big hill, and eventually we found ourselves down in a little hollow, which slowly opened up into a big valley. Everything seemed normal until we passed these stone gateposts, which then led us to this crazy little split road which had an avenue of carefully planted trees running down the median. We were seriously out in the middle of nowhere, and there was no reason that we could fathom for this fancy road out here to exist. We passed a few big abandoned buildings and grand steps which led to empty concrete foundations. But other than that, there were just a few scattered regular lived-in homes. After finding the waterfall's location, we turned around and headed back home the way we came, and finally saw a historical marker. Turns out this was one of only a handful of ghost towns in our state, and the name immediately rang bells, as a co-worker who was into the supernatural had just told me about this place, and that it was seriously haunted. It had been the site of a big printing press in the early 1900s, and an entire nearly self-sufficient town had grown up around it. It was apparently quite fancy in its heyday, with a big hotel, a trade school, and several health spas, as doctors used to send people to the area to recover from tuberculosis. When the press closed, the town quickly went downhill, and the buildings mostly either fell or burnt down except for the few that we'd seen. I think the official year of its demise was 1976, when the post office closed. We drove home that day without incident, but a few weeks later my boyfriend's younger sister was staying the night at our place and we began telling ghost stories. The two of us looked at each other like, "You thinking what I'm thinking?" and asked if she wanted to see a ghost town right now. She was game, and we hopped in the car a little after 1 a.m. and drove to this place. We were all excited and found ourselves going down that hill into the valley in no time. It was 2 a.m. at this point, and we thought we would just do a quick circuit down the avenue of trees and turn around. Half the fun was just being out at this hour and having the freedom to go wherever we wanted, whenever, as we were only 18 at the time and had just gotten our own place. We reached the end of the avenue and turned around. No sign of any ghosts, but my boyfriend said something I will never forget. Maybe we'll see a Bigfoot instead. The three of us got a hearty laugh out of that, as we believed in ghosts, but Bigfoot seemed silly. We passed the stone gate posts, and a little ways up on the left we began to see a few lived-in houses, signaling the end of the ghost town. And this is where it hit the fan. As our car crept up the road, our headlights hit this thing. It was standing in a ditch on the left side of the road on 2 legs, and was using its hands or forepaws like it was looking for something on the embankment it was facing. It was kind of hunched over, but if it stood straight up it would have been around 5 feet tall, covered in brownish, matted hair and fur. The body just looked like a big, shapeless mass of hair with arms and legs that seemed relatively skinny compared to the body. and when it turned its head to stare at us, we realized it didn't have a muzzle, but instead a flat face like an ape. Even with our bright lights on, we couldn't see a mouth or nose, just the eyes, and they were the cliché glowing red eyes like two pinpricks in this awful featureless face. It wasn't simple eye shine from our headlights. It was like they glowed from their own accord. We saw the damn thing and simultaneously yelled and asked if it was a bear. We were all very confused. All the while it just stood there staring. It wasn't scared and didn't move a muscle other than straighten up and turn its head to look at us when our lights first hit it. All these thoughts were racing through our heads, and we all sensed that something was very off about this encounter. Honestly, we were all afraid of it. It didn't give off a warm nor fuzzy feeling, and I wanted to get the hell out of that valley ASAP. We had slowed the car down to a crawl to get a good look at it, but when our brains tried to process it and came up with unidentified, we stepped on it and flew out of there. On the way, we passed a huge number of deer on the road, and I swear I felt like they were aware of this thing and may have just been running from it or avoiding it. I remember feeling worried for them, having to share the woods with this being. And at that point, just before topping the hill, a huge white owl swooped out of the trees and flew over our car. We all took that as a sign that we were safe and out of this thing's dominion. To this day, I've never seen another white owl. The whole way home we were stunned and were trying our best to debunk this encounter and identify the creature as a regular animal. When we got back to the house, I pulled out this book I have on animals in our parts of the world, and it listed the color of their eyes when they shone into. The only animal that has a red eye shine is a night heron, and that thing sure as hell wasn't a bird. The next day, I even called the Historical Society of the nearest actual town and asked about the ghost town. The woman literally says, it has a golf course. Why wouldn't she tell me anything about this place? It did indeed have a history worth mentioning, and she knew that I was asking about it because she pointed out the golf course, which is just a few miles down the road. I later found out that, like most others, this abandoned town had attracted vandals and morons who had done all sorts of damage in the past, but most people looking to piss around and tear things up don't call historical societies beforehand, so that quite didn't explain her reluctance to tell me anything. After the encounter, we of course told our friends and family, hoping that someone would say, "Oh, it's just probably a blah blah blah," and identify it for us, but no one ever could. The only thing this did was convince some of our friends to go investigate for themselves, and they would come back telling wild stories of being chased off by military people. I don't know what happened to our friends, but part of me thinks they were being stupid lurking around the buildings and had to be scared off like the idiot young'uns there were, especially considering all the vandalism which has occurred within the ghost town itself. But the odd thing is that I've read local forums about the ghost towns, and many people do indeed believe that there is some weird military business going on there. Maybe they're using it as a covert training facility, I don't know. This is just one of those places which becomes weirder and weirder the more you investigate. This past year I found a video online of some EVP sessions a local paranormal group captured in a nearby house. There are multiple voices, and one is a young girl who recited a rhyme which you can hear clear as day. Then you hear someone shush her, and we continue the rhyme in a whisper. The rhyme is from Genie on Pee Wee Herman. And on another site, I found a very unsettling account of a group of kids being led into the woods by people they thought were their family members, and it wasn't. I just know that this place is freaky, and that the three of us saw something there that doesn't exist in any natural history book. I was even trying to blame it on an animal that is said to be extinct. To this day, I can see that creature in my mind, standing there staring at us, its flat face and glowing red eyes. We only went back to that valley once after that, at 2:30 in the morning. We didn't see the creature, but there was a large fire burning in an open field not far from there. But there was no one to be found. No people, no cars, nothing. And we certainly weren't going to go out and investigate ourselves. Between June 2010 and July 2011, I attended the Cascade Job Corps program in Sedro-Woolley, in a rather quaint, albeit weird mountain town which bled into the neighbouring Burlington and Mount Vernon. I highly recommend that if you're in that part of Northwest Washington, you pay it a visit. The area is absolutely beautiful. Plus, if you're feeling the need to give yourself the creeps, put on the theme to Twin Peaks on your phone and drive around. Trust me, you'll love it. Cascade's Job Corps was a beautiful campus, somewhat isolated from the main body of Sedro-Woolley, with only one road to get in and out. The overall area has a sense of being an island surrounded by dense woodland. As you enter, you see to your left, after a short narrow drive, an abandoned 3-story building, covered in creeping vines and other parasitic plants common to the area. To the right, you see the lush green yards dotted with massive trees of varied species, and behind them you see the first of the 4 dorms. By this time, I feel I must make it known that the property, as far as I was able to determine, had been a campus for the Job Corps program for less than 20 years at that point. According to the information I gleaned from back when I was a student, the campus had been built as an asylum for the mentally disturbed. The oldest buildings still standing when I was in attendance were originally where the patients were kept, which was made somewhat obvious when you consider the common areas were built with thick observation windows to look in, and all the windows on site were heavily reinforced. Given that this campus has once been a lunatic asylum, naturally many stories and legends cropped up, often being told to the new input groups of fresh students by people who had been there a while. Of those stories, the 2 most common that we were told related to a little girl wearing a red dress said to haunt the halls of 2 of the dorms, and the other one of an angry Native American spirit that stalks the property at night. Additionally, you have stories of students hosting seances, using Ouija boards and summoning nefarious spirits and all other common spooky events that one would expect from an old asylum. What I can say with certainty is that there was something about campus that was supernatural. Myself being a cultist, I've learnt over the years that certain places house a wide variety of very palpable energy. An energy that has a habit of attracting spirits, elemental entities, and negative forces. Why this is, especially for that campus, I can only speculate. My own theory is that because the campus houses several hundred students ranging from ages 16 to 24, many of which come from rather turbulent backgrounds, too long to list here, whose own energies and psychological traumas imprint on the land. This is only amplified when you also consider that many years prior to the school, the area had been home to untold amount of people suffering from insanity, and likely had been subjected to a cornucopia of terrible procedures indicative to the time. Regardless, my years spent on campus had seen me encounter some unusual instances of the paranormal. The first of which happened 1 month after entering the program. I was sitting with my then girlfriend and our mutual friend on a bench which was located outside an old church, which sat behind my dorm and was connected to the cafeteria and one of the storage areas. As we were talking, we heard from the nearby church, which was surrounded by unkept hedges and bush, a very loud and low growl. For the record, all of us were worried a wild animal had wandered onto campus. It had happened before, and signs all over warned students of the possibility of bears and cougars, wild dogs, coyotes, and even porcupines. And it stood to reason that in that moment we were about to come face to face with a predatory animal. As we jumped up, we slowly began to back away. My girlfriend and friend behind me pulled at me, though I kept trying to tell them not to run but move slow in case it was an animal, and I was just about to tell both of them to remain calm when I suddenly felt a hard, forceful push on my chest, which staggered me back a few feet and almost knocked all 3 of us to the ground. Naturally, I was stunned. Nothing was in front of us, just open air, and yet it had felt as if 2 large hands had pressed against my chest and pushed me back with full force. And as I stood my ground trying to figure out what the hell had happened, I had been pulled away and forced into a run with my friends. Later that night, I would find on my chest where I was pushed 2 large red marks that looked and felt like sunburns. The second incident that happened to me was several months and 2 girlfriends later, around Christmas time. Normally the campus is nearly vacated since most of the students go home for the holiday break. Sadly, my only family was too far away to justify the trip, so I opted to stay. Needless to say, I was the only person in my dorm for that break, which was great. I basically had full reign over the common area. I could watch anything on TV, get first pick of the good snacks, and it was great. Plus, the additional privacy was always a bonus. Halfway through my break, I decided after lunch to take a hot shower and make my way into the stalls. I kicked on the water, let it run so that it could get hot, and jumped in. As I was standing under it, I felt a cold breeze on my feet, which was unusual since there were no windows in the showers. The whole dorm was heated constantly throughout. However, in that instance, I didn't think much of it. The very clear and loud sound of a child's giggle, on the other hand, I did think much of. So here I was standing naked, covered in soap, alone in a dormitory, and I hear what sounds like a small child's giggle right behind the shower curtain, which prompted me to spin on my heel, throw it open and find nothing, save for a very cold blast of air. And naturally, when you have something so random and creepy happen, the best thing I felt to do was to rinse off, put on my robe, and book it down to my bay room and lock the door. Now, had this happened when there were other people on site, I would have thought it was a prank, which was very common. But here's the problem. In my dorm I was alone, save for the RA who was downstairs, who was also a non-nonsense dude. I thought maybe it came from downstairs since the vents did connect, but again no one was there. I even later went back with the stepladder and looked into the vent to see if someone put some kind of speaker or something in there to mess with me. But there was not a thing to be found. Jerome, Arizona. Have any of you ever been there? I've been to many tacky and purely touristy ghost towns and tours, but when I arrived in Jerome, it felt different from the start. It's a quaint little mountaintop town in Arizona, partially isolated from a fair amount of the area, and is part of an odd amount of tragedies ranging from mine cave-ins and massive tuberculosis outbreaks. I'd heard about this place by a friend who lives in the area, and eventually planned to stay via Airbnb with a nice old couple during my visit, to visit the friend that told me about this place. When I arrived, I was surprised at just how quiet the town actually was. Beside the bar, everyone just seemed in harmony with the history of the town. Beforehand, I had made arrangements to go on a ghost tour with a pair of old local guides, father and son, who just happened to live in an old cathedral, to show me around some of the more popular haunted spots. We began the tour with myself and a young couple also staying in the town for the night. As I started to talk to the guides, I learned much about the town and their personal experiences through the years. Stories told to me of homeless men who had been dead for decades, and nuns who pushed the older men of the guides down a set of stairs when he first moved into the church. We visited the usual spots: old mines, abandoned hospitals turned into stores, and finally, an old coffee shop that used to be a very popular bar and eventually speakeasy. This was the place that changed my view on the paranormal. As we walked in, I immediately felt different. It was said that some man still resided there that died during the Prohibition era, and he would sometimes interact with people if he found them worthy of his time. In the shop, there was also a single couch that remained there from the era that was said he would sometimes sit and relax upon with others. Anyway, as I said, I felt different. I could tell the guides could too at this point. so we got settled in and started asking some simple questions. After a while, we started to get a response. Slight knocks on the door to the bathroom and the walls. We all thought it may have been a coincidence or just a hoax pulled by the guides that we were going, and knows we could be getting louder. This is when we saw the apparition of the lower part of a man's legs. Let's just say the young couple were terrified and immediately left with the older guide, leaving me and the younger one alone in the room. He sat on the chair across from me while I sat on the couch and asked questions. It wasn't truly that I had my experience until I ended up asking the ghost if he remained here waiting for a woman, but there was no response. Knowing that in the past Jerome was a gay haven back in the early 1900s. Then I asked, "Are you still waiting for a man?" I then felt the couch creak, as if someone else had sat down and felt a pressure on the back of my neck. This was all accompanied by a loud knock on the wall behind me. We promptly left after that, but making sure we thanked the ghost for his time at the door. Even if it wasn't that terrifying, it will always live in my mind as what convinced me of the paranormal. Coweta, Oklahoma, a small, quaint and haunted town. It was Indian territory, and I lived in 3 different houses there in different parts of town as a little girl, and experienced many supernatural things. There is a lot of history and a lot of old buildings and homes in Coweta. The first house I lived in was right across from some woods. My 3 siblings and I used to play there, and one day we decided to go in further than we had before. I was about 4 years old, and we found an old dilapidated shack. As we got closer to it, the leaves to my left flew up, and almost in a straight line like they would for a sudden gust of wind. But there was no wind. It stopped right in front of me, and then there was a very loud and deep man's voice all around us that just screamed, "Get out." Needless to say, we ran like hell. I was the youngest and smallest, and the first one out of there. After this, I would see an old man at the edge of the woods. He would stay there like he was guarding them. My mother asked me one day why I was afraid of the woods, and I told her it was because of the bad man. She inquired further. I told her that there was a bad man that didn't want us on the woods anymore, but she brushed it off, and life went on. We moved away for a couple of years until my parents divorced. My mother moved us into a small 2-bedroom house that was closer to our school. She was sleeping on the fold-out couch, and us kids had the 2 bedrooms. It was also right next to a cemetery, and we would play there too, as curious children often do. There was always a man, probably in his early 30s, that would visit his mother's grave often. He was there every time we went, no matter what time it was. He'd pack food and camp out, talking away at the grave all day. We were intrigued. We would hide behind the gravestones and try to hear what he was saying. I don't remember being able to make anything out, but his facial expressions and body movements were so casual, like there was something sitting in front of him keeping up the banter. One day, my oldest brother and I managed to get really close. We thought we were slick. All of a sudden, the man stood up, turned around, looked right at us and said, "What are you looking at, kid?" And then started speaking in different voices in a language we didn't understand. It sounded like gibberish. It is possible he was messing with us, but it was certainly creepy, and I stopped going to the area after that. After another short time, we ended up moving into downtown Coweta. It was literally one street with a small building neatly aligned on either side. We lived on a side street that was once a cemetery back when the town was first settled in 1840. When they decided to build houses, they moved all the graves. Well, I found out through my lack of supervision in 1990 and constant curiousness that they built houses on top of graves. There were gravestones in the crawl space of at least 3 homes. There was a very old white 2-storied house that sat 1 block from our house. We saw multiple families move in and out only a few months later. The house was empty almost most of the time, and my oldest brother and myself and cat climbed into the crawl space. My cat was awesome, and we attempted to turn a stone over so we could try and read it with our flashlight. As we did, something hissed, And this wasn't a normal animal sound, it was like 100 voices all hissing at once at different frequencies. The hair all over my body stood up and we freaked out. My brother was out first, my cat second. As I got to the sidewalk, I saw my cat get picked up and thrown. Someone grabbed my cat and pulled me to the ground. I was so scared I started crying, and my cat hid in my mum's closet and wouldn't come out until the next day. I ended up having a giant bruise on my right butt cheek, and it was hard for me to even walk past the house after that. In this same house with the graves in the crawl space, I would often see an old woman. I wasn't the only one that saw her, but I did see her more than others. I mostly saw her at night, but there would even be times during the day she'd be there too. At night I'd often wake up to her standing by my dresser, which was just in front of the door. She was illuminated by the hall light my mum would leave on for us, and would just stare and move her mouth, but I couldn't hear her. On 3 or 4 occasions, she would put her hands on my crayons that were on the dresser. The next day they'd be moldy and dried up. I have no idea why she would do that, but she did. And my mum just kept replacing them, but still never believed me. Also, things would turn on and off by themselves. There'd be footsteps, whispers, doorknobs rattling. All in all, I had a terrifying childhood in Coweta, Oklahoma. My whole town is haunted. So haunted that Town Hall hired an investigation crew to come live here, and then dedicated an entire section in our library to the town's paranormal activity. My favorite and most terrifying story is about the fog monsters. We get this Silent Hill-esque fog every now and then, and according to local legend, the silhouettes of figures can be seen while peering into the fog. Most people recount seeing the silhouettes of children and young adults, believed to be the settlers from the 1700s. There are 2 figures in particular, though, that earn their own stories. One of them is a quadrupedal hound. They're massive, easily 6 foot tall, standing on all 4s. The other seems to be a small girl, but what's noticeable about her is that only her dress really seems visible. Like you can make out her shape and outline just fine by looking directly at her limbs or face, seemingly makes them disappear while the floating dress stays. Although these figures seem dangerous, there hasn't been any reports of them actually hurting people. In my experience, they actually led me home when I was lost one day. I wasn't near them, but there was a wave of fear that comes over you when you see them, that just screams go the other way. While I was lost, they seemed to group and completely block off the roads, standing still just staring at me. I got home by just going down whichever roads they weren't on, so in a sense they were pretty benevolent, but they might have just had a strong sense of community, as I do live where they did. Back to the 2 special figures though. There's a legend of the girl visiting you in your dreams, mostly appearing in the dreams of children. She beckons you into the woods to play with her. When you wake up, you get a strong urge to go back to the place she takes you in your dream, but apparently no one who's returned to the woods while awake has returned. A lot of people who dreamed of her reported that they've seen her commune with animals, and has sometimes been seen with the quadruped. That leads me to believe that the quadruped is actually this lady's pet. Maybe not, but in my head it's canon for these guys. But these aren't what all the stories here are about. An example is that we have trails out in our woods for 4-wheeling and dirt bikes. Sometimes while walking alone down one, the path straightens where it shouldn't and eventually leads to an opening in the woods. In the opening is a small cabin in a garden, sort of like a berry farm, like the kind in a dugout pit that gets filled with water for an easy harvest. Legend says that a witch lives in the cabin, but the place is very difficult to find. As a child, I tried mapping out all the woods here to find it, but have only ever been there twice, and both times were by accident. If anyone is from the town of Chester, New Hampshire, I can't say for certain that you'll encounter anything if you come here, but almost all of the residents have. Check the library sometime if you're in the neighborhood. I'm 18 years old. 3 years ago, I went down to an abandoned town for work during the summer. where I would meet friends and stay for the next 3 months. I soon learned that this town was very haunted. This town is called Hiawatha in Utah. You can find it on Google Maps if you like. We had a daily routine of driving in a 13-passenger van to the work site, where we would build fences. All day, every day. When it was time to go, we got in the van and turned on the radio. Almost every day. We usually fell asleep on the way back to camp. Or at least I did, and everything seemed okay. But one day when we entered the town gates, there was an abandoned white house that no one dared go into. We were listening to the radio, when as soon as we passed the house, it turned to static. At first, I thought it was just a glitched radio, but every single day after we passed the house, the radio just turned to static. After a few days of this, my friends and I decided to explore the house and buildings which were abandoned, and decided to first explore the church. We didn't see anything but were still on edge, and we all walked outside, walking along the side of the church, when we heard heavy footsteps coming from the stage of the church. We all stopped talking and listened. For a few seconds there were footsteps and then nothing. We waited, but nothing. So we went back inside and couldn't find anything. We decided to explore some other buildings to see if we could see anything, and I personally didn't see a thing. But my friends claim that when we went down the mechanical elevator shaft, they could see a figure. They even pointed at it for me so that I could see it, but didn't see a thing. We all had an incredibly eerie feeling the time that we were inside those buildings. We got the courage to do Charlie Charlie in the elevator shaft, but when we tried to ask it questions, the pencil just fell off the other. And when we went down the elevator shaft, usually it would go down slowly to the basement, but this time it flew down and smashed something under us. We could tell there was something under us because it couldn't go all the way down. It was a very creepy place. I don't know who or what haunts the town, but it gives me chills thinking about it to this day. Hey guys, it's Mort here. Thank you so much for listening. I'm going to be honest. I was this close to not recording today. This close. But I didn't want to let you guys down. You see, as most of you are probably already aware because no doubt you watch other content creators, Google, so in effect YouTube, are putting in new rules. So they're going to be taking away a certain amount of tax for all US views. Now, as you probably guess, 71, it fluctuates between 71 and 73% of my audience actually live in the United States, which is great. So that means a fat chunk of my revenue is going to be taken away when these new policies kick in. As you can imagine, I'm not very pleased about it. And I don't know, I'm going to have some talks with my accountant to see if I can, how this is going to work. I mean, no one likes earning less money. It's just crap. That was a pretty miserable thing. But I learned this on the way to a ghost town. We went to a ghost town today. Me and Pandora, my wife, was busy with her work, and my mum told me about it, and I thought, it's like 10 minutes away, or 15. So I thought, I'm going to go and check it out. Of course, the first 10 minutes were paved roads, and then the alleged 5 remaining was like dirt roads, bad dirt roads. And, it took us like 15 minutes to traverse these dirt roads. But when we finally made it to this ghost town, we saw the dilapidated structures and like the fancy manor farm that has been completely abandoned. So many swimming pools, like 3 or 4. One was absolutely colossal, probably bigger than my house, in size, and all, my garden and everything, probably even bigger than that. It was enormous, this swimming pool. And obviously it was dried up with just a little bit of like dirty water on one side. It was a really interesting experience. I've always wanted to go urban exploring, and I did during the day to this little abandoned village. I mean, hamlet basically. It's basically a few houses in this farm manor house thing. But I'm really happy I went, and it was a cool experience. So there you go. I have now been urban exploring. I saw a ghost town, and yeah, it was fun. A car drove past, and I was a little bit scared though, just as I was about to leave. But I think it's on like a farm road. I don't know. Anyway, I've been talking for long enough. I'm trying not to let this stuff bring me down. It has, but I'm trying to, move past it. It is what it is, and hopefully my accountants can talk me through it when Google explain it a bit better, because I think it comes into effect in a month or so. But yeah, fun times. All right then, guys. So for now, I'm gonna leave you. If you're miserable now because I've, dampened the mood, you can always watch another one of my videos. But thank you so much. For now, stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.